Welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, we dig in, and pull out the important stuff. Today, we're tackling a big one. Protein. Everyone talks about it, right? For muscles, healthy eating. But for a long time, there's also been this buzz about potential dangers. Like, what if you have too much? Could it even, cause cancer? That's a scary thought. We've got a whole pile of research here, biochemistry, deep dives, health guides to try and sort fact from fiction. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because protein is, well, it's absolutely essential. It's involved in almost everything your body does. But then the conversation flips, doesn't it, to these worries about having too much. So we'll dig into the science behind those claims, especially the really attention-grabbing ones about cancer, and see what holds up.
Okay, good. So before we jump into the too much angle, maybe just a quick refresher. What are proteins, fundamentally? And amino acids?
Right. Basically, think of proteins as these really long, complicated chains, almost like Lego structures. And they're built from smaller pieces, the individual Lego bricks, which are the amino acids. There are about 20 common types of these amino acid bricks that make up almost all the proteins in your body. And each one has a slightly different shape or feature. We call it an R group. It's these tiny differences that give each amino acid and the protein it builds its specific job.
Ah, okay. So the R groups are like the little bumps and holes on the Legos that let them connect in different ways.
Exactly, yeah. And that leads to this huge variety.
And some of these amino acids, these bricks, are essential, you said, meaning we can't make them ourselves.
That's right. About 9 or 10 of them are essential. Your body just can't make them from scratch, so you absolutely have to get them from the food you eat. Others, your body can synthesize if needed. And the way these amino acids link up and then fold into complex shapes is, well, it's what allows proteins to do all their different jobs.
So what kind of jobs are we talking about beyond just, building biceps?
Yeah.
Why are they so critical day to day?
The list is huge. Much more than just muscle. They act as enzymes, speeding up pretty much every chemical reaction. They let your muscles contract. They form hormones like insulin. They're antibodies for your immune system. They even carry oxygen in your blood. That's hemoglobin. Plus, yeah, the structural stuff. Muscle, skin, hair, nails. Honestly, without enough protein, your body just can't function properly.
Okay, so clearly vital. But then you see everyone trying to get more protein, often with shakes, powders, whey, albumin, all that stuff. Is there, like, a recommended amount?
Yeah.
And can you actually overdo it?
That's a really key question because it's not a simple answer for everyone. The WHO historically suggested around 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight for just, average healthy adults. So for someone around 70 kilos, that's maybe 56 grams a day. But more recent guidelines, like from the Cleveland Clinic, often suggest higher amounts, maybe 1.2 up to 2.0 grams per kilo for certain people, like athletes or older adults trying to keep muscle mass or pregnant women. It really depends on your individual needs, your activity level, your goals.
Right. That's a pretty big range. And it feels like lots of people, especially with supplements, are aiming for that higher end, maybe even beyond. How do supplements fit in?
Well, the supplements, they can be really concentrated, sometimes up to 90% protein, and they're super popular, no doubt, especially if you're aiming for muscle gain or strength. They seem like an easy shortcut sometimes, but the problem we often see is people just adding them on top of whatever they're already eating. They might not actually need that extra amount, especially if their regular diet is already decent in protein. They end up going way over without really thinking about it.
Okay, so let's say someone is going way over. What are the actual worries? Which parts of the body take the hit?
The main focus is usually on the liver and the kidneys. They're the body's sort of processing centers for protein. If you consistently take in way more than your body can use for building and repair, these organs have to deal with the excess. The kidneys, for instance, have to filter out the waste products from protein breakdown, things like urea and ammonia. Too much of that puts extra load on the kidneys.
And I've definitely heard that connection, high protein, got to drink more water. Is that directly related? Why?
Oh, absolutely. That's critical. Sometimes high protein gets blamed for kidney problems, but often the real issue, or at least a big contributing factor, is just not drinking enough water. Being well hydrated helps your kidneys flush out all those metabolic waste products efficiently. If you're dehydrated, that stuff gets concentrated, and that can lead to overload and potential strain.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the long run? If someone eats very high protein for you,
Well, prolonged, really excessive intake can potentially lead to something called proteinuria. That's basically where protein starts leaking into the urine. It suggests the kidneys filters, the glomeruli, are getting damaged and losing their selectivity. It's seen as sort of an early warning sign for kidney issues down the road, like chronic renal insufficiency. For the liver, the worry is slightly different. Breaking down lots of excess protein for energy can actually ramp up fat production in the liver, which isn't great, especially if someone already has, say, fatty liver disease. And some studies also flag things like elevated uric acid. That's another protein breakdown product, and too much can cause gout or kidney stones in some people.
Right, so potential issues there if you really push it. But what about the flip side? The reason many people do push it, this idea that more protein equals more muscle. If I just keep chugging shakes, will my muscles keep growing indefinitely?
Yeah, that's a really common myth, and it's just not how it works, unfortunately. Your body is smart. It uses the protein it needs for muscle repair and growth, especially after exercise. But consuming protein beyond those needs, it doesn't magically build more muscle. The excess just gets broken, catabolized. It's either used for energy, potentially stored as fat if you're in a calorie surplus, or excreted. So that extra protein isn't building muscle, it's just giving your liver and kidneys extra work to do, basically. It's about adequacy, not excess.
Okay, that's a really important clarification. Now, let's get to the really serious claim, the one that probably worries people the most. Cancer. This idea that high protein intake might increase cancer risk. Where did that idea come from? What's the science there?
Right, this is a big one. The idea often comes from what we call a mechanistic hypothesis. It sounds plausible on the surface. The theory goes like this. Protein, especially certain amino acids, stimulates pathways in our cells involved in growth. Key ones are called mTOR and IGF-1. Think of mTOR as a sort of master growth switch in the cell. The hypothesis is that if you constantly overstimulate this growth switch with lots of protein, you could potentially encourage cells to grow and divide uncontrollably, which is, the basis of cancer. And it's true that this mTOR pathway is often hyperactive in many types of cancer. We even have cancer drugs that work by inhibiting mTOR. So you can see how the connection might be made.
Okay, yeah, I can see the logic there. Activating a growth pathway sounds like it could be bad if it goes too far. But what happens when we move from the theoretical mechanism to looking at actual people, large groups, over time? What did the human studies show?
And this is where things get, well, much less clear for that hypothesis. It's really crucial to look at the epidemiological data. While the MTO idea sounds neat, the large-scale studies in humans just don't consistently back up a strong link between high protein intake overall and increased cancer risk or mortality. For example, there have been several big meta-analyses, these combined results from lots of individual studies published around 2020, and they generally found no significant difference in overall cancer death rates between people eating low amounts of protein versus high amounts. And that included studies with both healthy and less healthy populations.
Okay. But what about that one study, I think it was Levine in 2014? That one seemed to get a lot of press, suggesting a really high risk, like 4 times the cancer mortality for high protein eaters.
Ah, yes, the Levine study. It definitely made waves. It did report that significantly higher risk, but specifically for people aged 50 to 65. But here's the critical context that often got missed. In the same study, for people over 65, high protein intake was linked to a 60% lower risk of cancer mortality.
Wait, so a huge risk in middle age, but then protective later on?
In the same study.
Exactly. And when they looked at all ages combined, there was no significant link overall. This kind of reversal, especially the extreme finding in the 50-65 group, is a bit of a red flag statistically. It likely happened because the actual number of cancer deaths within that specific age and protein intake subgroup was very small. With small numbers, statistical results can jump around wildly just due to chance. There isn't really a known biological reason why protein would be massively risky at 60 but protective at 70. Plus, other large studies looking specifically at risks for common cancers like prostate, ovarian, kidney, pancreatic, colorectal, the trellis, they generally haven't found a link to total protein intake either.
So, okay, if protein activates mTOR, the growth switch, and messed up growth is part of cancer, why isn't high protein intake consistently showing up as a major cancer driver in these big studies? It seems counterintuitive. It's a great question, and it highlights a key point. Yes, protein intake, especially amino acids, does activate mTOR, but that's a normal, necessary physiological process. It's how your muscles repair and grow after you work out, for example. Cancer isn't just about hitting the accelerator, like stimulating mTOR normally. It's usually about the brakes failing. It involves fundamental problems with how cells regulate their growth, often due to genetic mutations and other complex factors that disrupt the normal checks and balances. Just flipping the mTOR switch with dietary protein within a normal physiological context doesn't seem to be enough on its own to initiate that whole complex cascade of cancer development.
And the exercise point you mentioned earlier seems relevant here too, right?
Exactly. Think about resistance training, like lifting weights. That activates the mTOR pathway even more strongly than just eating protein does. It's a powerful stimulus for muscle growth. Yet we have tons of evidence from large population studies showing that strength training is not linked to higher cancer rates. In fact, it's usually associated with a lower risk of many cancers. So, if activating mTOR was the main problem, you'd expect weightlifters to be at higher risk, but they're not. It really supports the idea that normal mTOR activation isn't the primary driver here.
What about the type of protein? Does it matter if it's animal versus plant protein? I hear a lot about red meat specifically being linked to cancer.
That's another layer. Animal proteins, because they tend to be higher in certain amino acids like leucine, do stimulate mTOR a bit more strongly than most plant proteins. However, a very large study back in 2016 looking at over 130,000 adults actually found no difference in cancer mortality risk between those eating high amounts of animal protein versus lower amounts. Same for plant protein, no link found. Now, the red meat question. Yes, some observational studies do show an association between high intake of red meat, and especially processed meats, and a higher risk of certain cancers, particularly colorectal cancer. But this is where we have to be really careful about correlation versus causation. It's notoriously difficult to isolate one dietary factor. People who eat a lot of red meat, particularly processed meat, often have other lifestyle factors that also increase risk. Maybe they eat fewer vegetables, smoke more, exercise less, consume more processed foods overall. These are called confounding factors, and they make it really hard to say for sure that the red meat itself is the direct cause, rather than just being part of a broader, less healthy dietary and lifestyle pattern.
Okay, so putting all this together, pulling back from the specific studies and theories, what's the practical takeaway for you, our listener?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that the current scientific consensus, based on the large body of human evidence, suggests the widespread fear about protein, particularly causing cancer, is largely overblown. It's not strongly supported by the data we have. For most healthy people, the benefits of getting enough protein really seem to outweigh these unproven risks of it getting too much, within reasonable limits, of course. Remember all those essential functions we talked about? Immune function antibodies are proteins. Weight management protein is more satiating and has a higher thermic effect, meaning you burn more calories digesting it. And of course, building and maintaining muscle mass, which is crucial, especially as we age. That requires adequate protein, good timing, and enough overall calories.
So it sounds like the message isn't fear protein, but more like be smart about protein. Use it strategically.
Precisely. For the average person, the health risks associated with getting too little protein, like muscle loss, especially sarcopenia in older adults, are probably a much greater concern than the theoretical risks of getting too much, assuming we're not talking about extreme, excessive amounts. And maybe the biggest point from our whole discussion today is the need for informed choices, ideally with professional guidance. Just getting advice from, your buddy at the gym or the person selling supplements or random stuff online that can easily lead you to consume amounts that aren't right for you. A qualified nutritionist or dietitian, they can actually calculate your specific needs based on your weight, your activity, your health status, your goals. They can help you get what you need without unnecessarily overloading your system.
Wow. Yeah, that really was a deep dive. It's so clear that protein is essential, absolutely. But the how much, what kind, when, those details really matter. It's not just about chasing a high number, it seems, but about finding the right balance for your own body and lifestyle.
Indeed. Nutrition science is always evolving, right? And what looks like a simple question, is protein good or bad, rarely has a simple yes or no answer. Learning to distinguish between a plausible biological mechanism and solid evidence from human studies, and spotting those confounding factors we talked about, that's so key for making genuinely informed decisions about your health.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. In this world where health advice and supplements are everywhere, how much are you relying on the latest trend versus truly personalized expert advice for something as basic as how you fuel your body? Are you giving your body what it actually needs to thrive, or are you maybe just following the herd? Something to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep digging deeper.